You're not careless. You're not asleep. If anything, you're too aware. You read the books. You save the videos. You highlight the lines that hit too close. You journal about patterns, trauma, habits, mindset. You can explain yourself better than most people you know. You understand why you are the way you are. And yet, your life hasn't really moved. Not in the way you hoped it would. Not in the way all that insight promised. You still wake up with the same low-grade pressure in your chest. The same sense that something important is being delayed. The same quiet frustration that whispers, I know better than this, so why am I still here? That's the part you don't talk about. Because on the surface, it looks like progress. You sound evolved. You use the right language. You can name your wounds. You can articulate your fears. You can even explain why you're stuck in a way that sounds intelligent and reasonable. But when you're alone, really alone, there's a different feeling. A subtle one. Not panic, not despair. More like stagnation wrapped in self-awareness. Like running in place while convincing yourself you're moving forward because you understand the terrain better now. Here's the uncomfortable question most people never ask themselves. What if all this working on yourself isn't actually moving you forward? What if it's just making being stuck feel more sophisticated? Because think about it. You don't feel ignorant. You feel prepared. You don't feel lost. You feel like you're almost ready. You don't feel lazy. You feel like you're still figuring things out. And that's exactly why this trap is so hard to see. Self-improvement doesn't announce itself like avoidance. It doesn't look like procrastination. It looks like depth, like responsibility, like someone who's taking their life seriously. It gives you language, context, and meaning without demanding that you actually risk anything yet. You can stay right where you are and still feel like a person who's growing. And that's where something quietly breaks. Because growth, real growth, doesn't just change how you understand yourself. It changes how you show up. It disrupts routines. It collapses excuses. It forces decisions that can't be undone with another insight or another explanation. But understanding is safe. It lets you feel ahead of others without ever stepping into the arena where you might fall behind. It gives you the comfort of knowing why you're stuck, without requiring you to do the one thing that would actually threaten the version of you that still feels in control. And if any of this stings a little, good. That sting isn't shame. It's recognition. Because you're not failing at self-improvement. You've just been using it in a way that keeps you protected, polished, and permanently unfinished. And once you see that, really see it, you can't unsee it. That's where this story actually begins. Here's the part most people miss. Self-improvement feels good because it doesn't ask much from you. Not at first. It gives you relief without risk, movement without motion, the feeling of progress without the vulnerability of change. When you consume self-improvement, your nervous system relaxes. You're not being judged. You're not being tested. You're not exposed. You're just absorbing, understanding, naming, framing. And every insight gives you a small hit of calm like, okay, at least now I know what's going on. That feeling is addictive. Because for a moment, the pressure lifts. You're no longer behind. You're in process. You're not stuck, you're becoming. And becoming sounds hopeful, safe, responsible. But look closer. Nothing in your external life has to change for that feeling to exist. Your habits can stay the same. Your choices can stay familiar. Your risks can stay theoretical. You can keep your identity intact while still telling yourself you're working towards something better. That's the trade most people don't notice they're making. They trade discomfort for clarity, action for explanation, exposure for insight. And every trade feels reasonable, even mature, especially if you're intelligent and self-aware. Because awareness feels like progress. You can explain why you procrastinate, why you avoid, why you hesitate. You can trace it back to patterns, childhood, fear, perfectionism, trauma. And all of that may be true, but notice what's happening underneath. The more you understand, the less urgent it feels to act. Understanding becomes a buffer, a soft layer between you and the moment where you'd have to commit, choose, or risk being wrong in public. As long as you're still figuring it out, you don't have to step forward and let reality answer back. And the mind loves that. Because the mind's job isn't to make you grow, it's to keep you safe. And self-improvement, when it stays theoretical, is one of the safest places you can hide. It keeps you busy without being dangerous. So you stay here, watching, reading, reflecting, feeling deeper, feeling smarter, feeling like you're on the path, even though the path hasn't moved beneath your feet in a long time. This is where the quiet self-deception sets in. You start believing that insight is the work, that awareness equals transformation, that once you understand yourself enough, action will magically follow. But it doesn't, because nothing in your environment, your habits, or your identity has actually been challenged yet. Self-improvement, in this form, becomes the safest way to avoid the one thing that would change everything. The moment where you stop explaining yourself and start exposing yourself. And that's the crack most people never look at. Because the moment you admit that self-improvement has become a comfort zone, you're forced to ask a much harder question. Not what do I still need to learn, but what am I avoiding doing? Your mind didn't choose this by accident. It didn't randomly fall in love with self-improvement podcasts, frameworks, and endless analysis. It chose them because they solve a very specific problem, one you rarely admit you have. Uncertainty. Your mind hates uncertainty more than it hates failure. Failure hurts, but uncertainty threatens identity. It forces you into a space where you don't know who you are yet, how good you are, or how this ends. And for a mind built around intelligence, competence, and control, that space feels dangerous. Self-improvement gives your mind a workaround. Instead of stepping into uncertainty, you study it. Instead of risking exposure, you prepare. Instead of committing to one direction, you keep all options open, just in case. From the outside, it looks disciplined, responsible, mature. From the inside, it feels like safety. Because as long as you're learning, nothing can judge you yet. As long as you're working on yourself, no result can contradict the story you still want to believe about who you are. Potential stays intact. Identity stays clean. And here's the part that's hard to swallow. Your mind gets rewarded for this. Every insight gives you a hit of relief. Every explanation lowers the tension. Every new framework makes you feel a little more in control of chaos. Your brain doesn't know the difference between understanding and progress. It just knows that one feels safe and the other feels risky. So it quietly nudges you toward the safer one. That's why you can spend hours thinking about change and still feel a subtle resistance when it's time to act. Because action collapses possibility. Action creates evidence. Action forces the question your mind has been avoiding the whole time. What if this is who I really am? Self-improvement keeps that question suspended in midair. It lets you stay undefined, unfinished, untested. You don't fail. You don't succeed. You just remain someone who could. And that's incredibly comfortable for a smart mind. Because once you commit, once you choose, once you stay long enough for results to show up, you lose the protection of ambiguity. You don't get to hide behind explanations anymore. Reality gets a vote. So your mind does what it was trained to do. It optimizes for safety. It keeps you in the thinking loop. It convinces you that one more insight, one more realization, one more breakthrough inside your head will finally unlock movement. But deep down, there's a quiet truth you can feel. You're not stuck because you don't understand yourself enough. You're stuck because understanding has become a substitute for courage. And until that clicks, really clicks, your mind will keep using self-improvement for the same purpose. Not to change you, but to protect you from being changed. Here's where this gets uncomfortable. Because at some point, self-improvement stops being about growth and starts being about protection. Not protection from failure, protection from definition. You've built an identity around being the kind of person who understands. The thoughtful one, the self-aware one, the person with depth, insight, potential. The one who doesn't rush into things blindly like everyone else. And that identity has kept you safe for a long time. As long as you're in progress, nothing can pin you down. As long as you're learning, reflecting, healing, preparing, you can't be measured. You can't be judged by outcomes. You can't be confronted with results that might not match the story you've been telling yourself. Because results are brutal. They don't care how much you understand. They don't care how complex your inner world is. They don't care how much potential you have. They just show what happened. And that's the threat. Real action would collapse the identity you're still clinging to. It would turn I could into I did or I didn't. It would replace imagination with evidence. So instead of stepping forward, you refine the story. You analyze why now isn't the right time. You explain why this version of you still needs more clarity, more healing, more alignment. You call it patience. You call it discernment. You call it growth. But underneath all of that, there's a quieter motive. You're trying to protect the version of yourself that hasn't been tested yet. Because once you stay, really stay, you risk finding out something terrifying. That you're not as exceptional as you hoped. Or worse, that you are capable, but only through effort, repetition, and mediocrity before mastery. And that's unbearable if your worth is tied to being naturally sharp, insightful, gifted. So you exit early, not loudly, not dramatically. You drift, you pivot, you restart somewhere cleaner, somewhere safer, somewhere that lets you feel intact again. This is why starting feels easier than staying. Starting feeds identity, staying threatens it. And until you see that clearly, self-improvement will keep serving the same hidden purpose. Not helping you grow, but helping you avoid the moment where growth would force you to let go of who you think you are. Because growth isn't just about becoming better. It's about allowing an old identity to die. And that's the part self-improvement never warns you about. There's a moment when it all quietly falls apart. Not dramatically, not with a breakdown, just a dull exhaustion that settles in when you realize you've learned a lot and moved very little. You stop getting that hit from new insights. Another video doesn't land. Another framework doesn't excite you. Another explanation feels empty the moment you hear it, like food that tastes fine but never satisfies. You know the language now. You've heard every angle, and somehow that makes the stuck feeling worse. Because now you can't pretend you don't know. This is the moment most people mislabel as burnout. They say they're tired of trying, tired of growth, tired of working on themselves. But look closer. They're not tired of growth. They're tired of avoiding the cost of it. You feel cynical, detached, slightly above it all. Advice sounds obvious. Motivation sounds naive. You start thinking, I've already heard this. And maybe you have, but hearing was never the issue. The real fatigue comes from living in a constant state of almost. Almost ready, almost aligned, almost confident enough to begin. And that limbo drains you more than failure ever could, because it keeps your life suspended without resolution. This is where the shift tries to happen. A quiet realization starts to surface, one you've been dodging for a long time. That growth was never supposed to feel comfortable. That clarity was never meant to replace courage. That understanding was never meant to protect you from friction. You begin to see the pattern clearly now. Self-improvement kept you informed, but also kept you untouched. And untouched means unchanged. That's when a different question replaces all the old ones. Not, what else do I need to understand? But what I have to risk if I stopped hiding behind insight. Because real growth doesn't ask you to know more. It asks you to stay when you're confused, to stay when you're not special yet, To stay when effort feels clumsy and progress looks unimpressive. And that's when self-improvement finally loses its grip. Not because you reject growth, but because you realize growth isn't something you study. It's something that leaves marks. And once you're willing to let it mark you, self-improvement stops being a refuge and becomes a doorway you finally walk through. Here's where things finally get quiet. Not the fake calm that comes from understanding everything. The real kind. The kind that settles in when you stop running mental loops and start standing in one place long enough for something to happen. You don't suddenly feel confident. You don't feel ready. What you feel is simpler, heavier, maybe, but honest. You feel exposed because you've stopped hiding behind insight. You've stopped using understanding as a shield. You're no longer asking yourself if this is the perfect move or the smartest path or the most aligned version of growth. You're asking a different question now. Am I willing to stay? Stay when the excitement fades. Stay when progress looks ordinary. Stay when there's no internal applause for being deep or self-aware. This is where growth actually begins. Not when you understand yourself better, but when you allow yourself to be shaped by repetition, friction, and time. When you accept that becoming real will cost you the comfort of staying undefined. You start choosing exposure over explanation, action over interpretation, commitment over clarity. And something strange happens when you do. Your mind stops fighting you. Not because resistance disappears, but because the argument ends. There's no longer a debate about who you might be. You're letting action answer that question instead of thought. You don't feel dramatic motivation. You feel grounded, present, slightly uncomfortable, and oddly relieved. Because for the first time in a long time, you're not trying to become someone through thinking. You're letting the process do its quiet work on you. You still reflect. You still learn. But those things no longer come before action. They come after. They refine what you've lived instead of replacing it. And slowly, without fanfare, trust returns. Not because you promised yourself anything, but because you stayed when it would have been easier to pivot, explain, or start over somewhere cleaner. That's the shift. You realize self-improvement was never the enemy. It was just never meant to be a hiding place. The real work begins when you step out of the mental space and into the arena, imperfect, unpolished, visible. When you let life push back and you don't retreat into understanding to soften the blow. And from that place, something solid forms. Not confidence, not certainty, but a quiet strength that doesn't need to be explained. You stop asking who you're becoming. You start becoming and letting the march prove it. And that's when everything changes. Not loudly, not all at once, but for real.